Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. It's good to be with you here on this Friday, February 27th. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at KSC. As you can see with the clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, it is currently T-minus 58 minutes, about 10 seconds remaining before the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. Starting to get some light in the sky as this 25th Falcon 9 launch of the year is preparing to take flight. Departure time, as currently set, is 7:16 a.m. Eastern, 12:16 UTC for our friends joining around the world. This will also be our 14th launch orbitally from the Cape so far in 2026, the 13th from SpaceX. As we're getting rolling this morning, want to thank the 500 and plus early birds that are up with us at this point in the morning, or if it's a little bit later in the day in your neck of the woods around the world, a bit of a more reasonable hour. Appreciate you stopping by, spending part of your day with us. You can do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing this stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Also want to acknowledge a recent milestone that we passed that was in the midst of one of the busier streams, but appreciate everyone who helped us get to 400,000 subscribers. Really appreciate all of you who are here along with us on this journey. It's a great, easy, and free way to support the channel. It's just to hit that subscribe button. And if you turn on notifications, that way you won't be left in the lurch when we start new live streams or post new video content here to the YouTube channel. Got a couple of things in the hopper right now, so now's a great time to become a Spaceflight Now subscriber. A little bit later on this morning, over on our 24/7 live stream called Artemis Live, we'll be sharing the administrator level briefing regarding the Artemis program, updates on the Artemis 2 mission that are going to be discussed by Administrator Jared Isaacman alongside Associate Administrator Amit Kshatriya. The two of them will be joined as well by the Acting Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate, Lori Glaze. That briefing is expected to begin at 10 a.m. Eastern, 1500 UTC. And again, that'll be over on our 24/7 live stream called Artemis Live. With the rocket back inside the VAB, that's the reason why we're showing VAB views on that stream until the rocket emerges once again. Tease ahead to one of the things that we're working on to get up on the channel, hopefully later today, is a 4K replay of the return to the VAB of the Space Launch System rocket and mobile launcher. That video is nearly done. Look for that later on, later this morning or early afternoon. Bringing things back to this mission here, just under 54 minutes remaining on the clock. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast today. Our photographers are out and about. They've, of course, been getting these shots that you're seeing set up to bring you the fabulous sunrise here on Florida's Space Coast. And if you're not already following the fellas on X, you can find them at their handles here. Adam is at aburn NYC, John at John Pisani Photo, Michael at MD Kane Jr. While you're there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now, simply at Spaceflight Now. We are on Threads, Blue Sky, and Facebook for those of you who are not on X. The Falcon 9 rocket you're looking at right now is over at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This mission on tap today, named Starlink 6-108, will be SpaceX's 20th flight supporting its own Starlink broadband internet constellation in low Earth orbit. Prior to today's liftoff, the company has sent more than 500 satellites into orbit this year alone. It is knocking on the door of having 10,000 satellites in orbit at once for the Starlink constellation. Currently at a little more than 9,800 as of now. Liftoff this morning at 7:16 a.m. Eastern is just about half an hour after sunrise today. So should be some pretty nice lighting for this Falcon 9 rocket once it takes off. It'll fly on a southeasterly trajectory upon leaving the pad there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The Falcon 9 first stage booster on tap to support today's flight is, in fact, one of the most flown boosters for SpaceX. So we'll see a little bit of a change here on the top 5 Falcon 9 frequent flyers list. Change in number, that is, not change in position. B1069 is set to take flight today, making it the 4th booster for SpaceX to have achieved a total of 30 flights, if all goes well. The company is working to certify its Falcon 9 first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece, so making good headway on that. This booster began flying back in December of 2021. We'll talk a little bit more about its flight history later on in the broadcast. taking a look at our live chat. Appreciate Aussie Space Girl for joining us here this morning. Thanks for holding it down in the chat. As a quick reminder, you can help Stephanie and any of the other mods who are popping on in this morning by following our live chat rules. We ask that you post your message in English so that our mods can respond accordingly. Also, please hold off from delving into topics of overt politics or religion and refrain from using all caps in your messaging. Emojis are perfectly fine. We just ask that you don't create a huge block of them so it takes up a large chunk of the chat. And last but certainly not least, we ask that you treat each other with the kindness and respect that you yourself would like to be treated, and we'll all get along swimmingly. We're also joined in the chat this morning by one of our channel members, Cumulus Granatus, who's able to help answer folks' questions in the chat as we go throughout the coverage. Speaking of our channel members, certainly appreciate each and every one of them as they are an enduring part of sustaining our reporting and coverage here at Spaceflight Now. So big thanks to folks like M. Teresa, M12407, Wendy Norris, Jim Fowley, and many, many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, shop.spacelightnow.com, access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. Time now, T-minus 43 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. As we're approaching the point in the hour in which SpaceX will make the call on the start of prop load today, let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline. The milestone's still ahead before SpaceX is able to fly its 25th Falcon 9 rocket launch of the year. Generally speaking, at T minus 38 minutes is when the SpaceX launch director will make the call that they are go for prop load. SpaceX does its readiness poll electronically, so if it's in a good posture, this can happen a little bit ahead of the 38-minute mark. But once the all clear is given, tanking of the Falcon 9 rocket starts at T minus 35 minutes. At this point, liquid oxygen will flow on board the rocket's first stage, and RP-1, a rocket-grade kerosene, will begin to be loaded on board the rocket's first and second stages. Half an hour before liftoff is when SpaceX starts to load cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels for the Falcon 9's first stage, and we'll do the same for the upper stage a few minutes after that. The helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. 23 minutes before the rocket's departure is when the second stage RP-1 tank should reach flight levels. At T minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the strong back chill down gets underway. At this point in the count, SpaceX is thermally conditioning the feed lines at the pad prior to loading liquid oxygen on board the rocket's upper stage. Depending on how much Mr. Fog we're going to see at the pad, we should be able to see the so-called big vent, which here at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station will begin at about T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds, lasting about 4 minutes in duration, and setting the stage for the second stage, LOX load, to begin at T minus 16 minutes. T minus 7 minutes is when the engine chill gets underway. SpaceX will flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect those 9 Merlin 1D engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. 6 minutes before flight, the first stage kerosene tank is full, and at T minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the retraction of the strong back. First, the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings will open up, and then the transporter erector, otherwise referred to as the strong back, that will recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket, and it stays in that position until liftoff. Then at that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes before takeoff, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full. Same will be true on the second stage about a minute after that. At this point, the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final minute of the count, when we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is entered into its automated startup sequence, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. The SpaceX launch director will confirm that they are in fact go for launch at T minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command will be given at T minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite as expected, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Once again, currently targeting that departure at 7:16 a.m. Eastern, 12:16 UTC. Just about 38.5 minutes from now. Coming up to that decision point for the start of tanking. Just about 37.5 minutes on the clock at this point in the count. We are, in fact, joined today by our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images, but the reason we haven't shown you much from their camera at all is because they're quite socked in with the fog from their perspective on Merritt Island. So, unfortunately, not the best angle to show you the rocket, but truth be told, our perspective here at the press site is diminishing as well as we speak. However, not too bad of weather for folks who want to spend some time on the waters of the Indian River Lagoon this morning. Looking live at the Banana River. One of a number of folks who's taken the opportunity to enjoy the serenity of an early Friday morning here in Brevard County. And of course, throughout the broadcast, you've been hearing the natural soundtrack from the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, which surrounds the various launch pads here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. While it is a bit cloudy this morning, generally speaking, it shouldn't be too much of an issue for SpaceX to launch today. The 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 85% chance for favorable weather, citing possible interference from the cumulus cloud rule. If for whatever reason SpaceX is unable to launch today, though, the weather outlook tomorrow is considerably worse. It drops down to chance for good weather down to 30%. Launch attempt tomorrow would mean SpaceX would have to deal with interference from the cumulus cloud rule, the thick cloud layers rule, and the surface electric fields rule. So, from a meteorological perspective, flight today is certainly preferable. Time now currently T minus 33 minutes, 9 seconds and counting. Given that the clock continues to tick on, presumably SpaceX has in fact given the go for the start of prop load. However, discerning that this morning is going to be quite difficult given that we unfortunately do not have a good view of the rocket given all the fog this morning. Typically, around this point in the countdown, we should be starting to see a frost line form at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket as the super cold densified liquid oxygen begins loading on board the Falcon 9's first stage. However, as you can see from this camera view, it is quite difficult to make any discernment between the fog and potential vapors. So maybe a little bit deeper into the broadcast than typical when we're comfortable really confirming that prop load is underway. One of the hopefully visible good visual indications will come around at T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds when we see the big vent. That should be prominent enough from the strong back that we should be able to see it even with the fog. Fingers crossed, at least. Time now, T minus 28 minutes, 38 seconds, and counting. If you're just now joining us, you're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the Starlink 6-108 mission from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Certainly appreciate the little more than 900 of you who are watching right now live. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream to allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Still quite difficult to view the Falcon 9 rocket right now, we grant you, given the fog, but just conferring with our team behind the scenes, and we do believe we are seeing the frost line build at the base of the booster, that visual indication that we were watching for to feel confident in saying that the Falcon 9 is in fact fueling this morning for a launch attempt in just about 27 and a half minutes. Taking a spin around the Space Coast, you can see lots of areas around here socked in with the fog. The top half of the vehicle assembly building is lost to the cloud, as is the top of the mobile launcher 2 to the right. Of course, on the right-hand side of this building is where the Artemis 2 SLS rocket is. Look over at Launch Complex 39A. Those here who were present for the rollback of the Artemis 2 mission upon leaving may have spotted a Falcon Heavy side booster that was making its way over to the Hangar X site. Good sign that we are getting close to our first Falcon Heavy launch of the year, which will, of course, take flight from Launch Complex 39A. SpaceX made the decision last year that they were going to shift the vast majority of Falcon operations from 39A and concentrate them over here at Pad 40 so that 39A workers can focus on upcoming flights of the Falcon Heavy at their main Falcon pad and also allow work to be even less encumbered by Falcon 9 rocket launches and allow the progress on the Starship Tower to continue towards a first flight from that site later this year. At least that's the plan. Just under 24 minutes remaining on the clock. As we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, the Falcon 9 first stage booster that is supporting today's mission has the tail number of 1069 in the SpaceX fleet. It will become just the fourth booster to achieve a total of 30 flights. So before we, well, hopefully see the start of the so-called big vent, let's go ahead and talk about this Falcon 9 first stage and its flight history to date. This booster began flying, as a number of them have, in support of a mission to the International Space Station. This was a cargo flight, CRS-24, which took off on December 21st of 2021, followed by the launch of its first batch of Starlink satellites with the Starlink 4-23 mission on August 28th. Up next was a flight for Eutelsat, the Hotbird 13F mission on October 15th of 2022, followed up by SpaceX's first launch supporting the OneWeb internet constellation. This was the 15th batch of OneWeb Generation 1 satellites to head up into low Earth orbit. A constellation consists of a little more than 600 satellites in total. Another batch of Starlink satellites followed that. Then a mission for one of SpaceX's longest standing customers, SES, and their 18th and 19th satellites. This has been a very Starlink heavy booster, and really it's all Starlinks after the SES mission from here to the present. The most recent flight for this booster was last month on January 9th when it launched the Starlink 6-96 mission. Launching from this same pad, landing on the booster or the drone ship that it will land on again today. That is designated a shortfall of gravitas. A successful booster landing today would mark the 144th good landing on that particular drone ship and the 475th booster landing using a drone ship. Well, the so-called big vent should be underway at the pad. Unfortunately, I was proven wrong that we are not seeing the big vent, unfortunately, this morning, given the sheer amount of fog around Florida's Space Coast. Time now, T minus 16 minutes, 13 seconds and counting. Of course, because of the fog, we were unable to see the so-called big vent today, but upper stage liquid oxygen load is just now about to begin. Taking a look at some weather data courtesy of the GOES East satellite. The teal color here is highlighting the fog that is permeating across really all of Central Florida today from the Tampa Bay up here to the Cape. So for those of you who are going to be hitting the road for your morning commutes, I would say just take it nice and easy on the road, as visibility may not be the best in your neck of the woods. Looks like it might be particularly troublesome along the I-4 corridor. Time now, T minus 14 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. Thanks to the more than 1,500 of you who are watching along with us live this morning. Also want to thank channel member Raleigh Nevels for the $5 super chat. This is Gail and Raleigh. Thank Will and Spaceflight now as we wait at Cocoa Beach for the sun to meet Mr. Fogg. It's a beautiful morning for a rocket launch. Yeah, it's one of those days where the Cape is doing its best Vandenberg impression. Also, speaking of those two launch sites, let us know where you're watching from, whether you're socked in with us in the fog or a little bit further flung away. Looks like Go for Launch Max Q is joining us from Trinidad and Tobago. Red Dawn joining us from Wisconsin. Of course, Cumulus Granatus is up in British Columbia, Canada. Lots of folks from all over the globe, and it's wonderful to see. Time now T minus 11 minutes, 12 seconds, and counting. Even if in 11 minutes when the rocket does take off, we are uh, less than optimally situated from our tracking cameras, we will be able to go to the spaceport on board cameras, and we'll be getting pad level views from SpaceX of the Falcon 9 rocket beginning at around T minus 5 minutes as well. So hopefully, right up close to the rocket at the pad, they'll at least be able to get some ground level visibility. But again, the onboard cameras will be quite nice and very helpful today. As we're getting closer to launch, let's go ahead and talk about the payload that is on board today's Falcon 9 rocket. The latest batch of 29 Starlink V2 Mini optimized satellites getting ready to head into low Earth orbit. To date, SpaceX has launched more than 11,300 satellites. Of those, more than 9,800 are still in low Earth orbit. This will be the company's 20th mission so far in 2026 to support the Starlink constellation. Following satellite deployment, the company will have more than 540 that have been launched in 2026. You're looking at the manufacturing process for the Starlink V2 Mini optimized satellites. Happens up in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. These optimized versions of the Starlink V2 Minis clock in at about 1,267 pounds or 575 kilograms, notably lighter than their predecessor V2 Minis, which weighed 1,760 pounds or about 800 kilograms. That's why SpaceX has been able to launch batches of up to 29 V2 Minis in one go, where they were previously capped at around 25 from here in Florida, and less than that from Vandenberg. With their solar panels fully extended, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. You're looking at those Argon Hall effect thrusters that they use for in-orbit maneuvering. These particular satellites will be deployed at about 168 miles or 271 kilometers in altitude at a 43-degree inclination. And of course, SpaceX has long since stopped showing deployment live, so we'll rely on them to confirm a good deployment of the batch of Starlink satellites. That'll happen a little more than an hour after liftoff. Just under 7 minutes before the planned liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket. At this point in the count, SpaceX is thermally conditioning those Merlin vacuum engines, running a little bit of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps. Coming up in less than 30 seconds is when the first stage RP-1 tank should reach flight levels. Before we go ahead and get pad level views of the Falcon 9 rocket, let's quickly touch on the flight trajectory for this mission. The Falcon 9 rocket will take off from Space Launch Complex 40 there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It will fly on a southeasterly trajectory upon leaving Florida's Space Coast. Less than 3 minutes into the mission, the booster will separate from the upper stage and begin its path towards a landing on SpaceX's drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. The company will also endeavor to recover the payload fairings. They'll splash down in the water of the Atlantic Ocean a little bit further downrange from where the booster is set to land on the drone ship. Once down in the water, they'll be brought aboard a SpaceX recovery vessel, and like with the booster, these two vessels will be brought through Port Canaveral and onto the Hangar X site, where they will be refurbished and turned around for future missions. Coming up on 5 minutes remaining on the clock, pad level views of from SpaceX are coming up next.
Tanks are pressing for a strong back retract.
Well, I guess the only good thing is everyone is getting socked in by the fog, even right in close proximity to the pad. As you just heard, the retraction of the strong back is now getting underway. Can't see just the base of the rocket here. At this point, we would normally be seeing, oh, there's a better view. There go the clamp arms. Looks like a well-used passive half of the payload fairings, potentially a new active half. A little bit hard to discern. SpaceX doesn't often talk about the flight history for its fairing halves, so it's a harder bit to track here. There you can see the strong back now starting to recline away from the Falcon 9 rocket. Those hissing and pop sounds of the various vents there at the pad. All normal and to be expected, given the proximity of where SpaceX has its microphones. Coming up on the final 3 minutes of the count here in just a second, we should be hearing a call for Stage 1 LOX load wrapping up.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
And with that good call, we should hear something similar regarding the rocket's second stage LOX tank. It's coming up at around T-minus 2 minutes.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
And with that call, the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. Hard to see, but in just a moment, there will be the ground gas closeouts as SpaceX releases the remaining liquid oxygen from the feed lines, venting out as gaseous oxygen.
Ground gas closeouts.
You can actually make out the ground gas closeouts from this particular vantage point. A little bit here as well. So potentially we may see just a hint of a glow at liftoff. Again, we will do our level best in the final minute here.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
We'll be using SpaceX's onboard cameras likely quite quickly after liftoff. Just waiting for the SpaceX launch director to confirm they are go for launch.
Launch director, go for launch.
And with that good call, we are now coming up to the final 30 seconds before the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9. The 25th for SpaceX so far this year. "15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We should have engine ignition. And we have liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 6-108 mission. Unfortunately, sucked in by the fog here. We do have a confirmed liftoff. We'll go to the SpaceX cameras here in a moment. There you can see the Falcon 9 climbing through the clouds, past the fog. Now a little more than 30 seconds into flight. No good tracking visuals today, but do have some stellar audio equipment out there. And actually, we've got the tracker. Falcon 9 clearing the clouds, and we've got a visual. Falcon 9 passing through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Now throttling back up on the 9 Merlin engines. And back chill is coming up next.
And back chill underway.
That good call out represents the thermal conditioning of the Merlin vacuum engine on the rocket's second stage. SpaceX is next moving to a few events in rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation and then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine. The payload fairings will jettison around the 3-minute mark in flight.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
Good calls, good visuals. You can see the hypersonic grid fins extending there on the booster.
Fairing separation confirmed.
And a good call for payload fairing separation. And a nice view of the 29 Starlink satellites on board. One of those fairing halves just to the left of the nozzle here in this view. They will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean, just a little bit further downrange from where the booster is set to land on the drone ship. coming up to nearly 4 minutes into this mission so far. The next big milestone for SpaceX will be the 3-engine entry burn as the booster starts to hit the brakes on its way down to the drone ship. Looks like the first stage booster 1069 will be topping out at an apogee of 113 kilometers in altitude, now starting to make its descent. Those puffs that you see occasionally between the grid fins on the booster are the cold gas thrusters. This helps the booster adjust its attitude or positioning as it angles itself ahead of the start of the entry burn.
Stage 1 FTS is safe.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
This burn will last a total of less than 30 seconds.
Stage 2 FTS is safe.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And with a good conclusion to the entry burn, coming up next will be the single engine landing burn, which will take B-1069 on down for hopefully a soft landing on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas.
Stage 1 transonic. Stage 1 landing burn. Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
And for a 30th time, B-1069 has landed
Stage 1
safely.
landing confirmed.
MVAC shutdown.
Nominal orbit insertion.
Good confirmation of a nominal orbit insertion for the Falcon 9 upper stage, which will now coast until T plus 53 minutes, 52 seconds in flight. There will be a brief 2-second burn to circularize the upper stage orbit before releasing the Starlink satellites at T plus 1 hour, 4 minutes, 59 seconds post liftoff. Well, with the fog this morning, the views of the Falcon 9 from the ground were not the most optimal, but got a lovely view of this blue great heron here. One of the many occupants of the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge, of course. Now, a little more than 11 minutes into the flight, we're going to go ahead and turn now to our mission stats as they currently stand. Before we do that, I want to briefly thank channel member Chuck Close for a very generous $25 super chat. Really appreciate that, Chuck. Thanks so much for supporting our coverage today. Well, with the good liftoff and landing of the first stage booster, that wrapped up mission number 30 for booster 1069. This was SpaceX's 607th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 25th of the year so far. This was the company's 541st Falcon booster reflight, the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 165th orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 311th orbital launch from Pad 40 for SpaceX, and the 366th overall orbital launch from this site as well. Here's a look at the updated bar chart now with this mission well underway. Moving on to some recovery stats. This was the 144th good landing on the drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. It marked SpaceX's 475th drone ship landing and the 576th booster landing for the company. Also, the 579th landing of an orbital class rocket, including Blue Origin's booster Never Tell Me the Odds, preparing for flight once again in the not too distant future. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 14th orbital launch from the Sunshine State of Florida, although quite foggy today. This was the 26th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 28th from a U.S. rocket company, and the 42nd orbital launch attempt around the world. There have been 3 orbital failures so far this year. Here's a look at the updated Cape bar chart now, and here's where the global pie chart now currently stands. Notable that this pie chart has been just steadily building on the U.S. side for the better part of the last couple of weeks. In fact, since the launch of the SpaceX Crew 12 mission to the International Space Station, all orbital launches around the world, now 9 of them, have been exclusively SpaceX Falcon 9 flights. The launch of Alpha's Firefly, or the launch of Firefly Aerospace's Alpha rocket from out west in Vandenberg Space Force Base was originally planned for today, but due to high upper level winds, the company decided to stand down from that launch attempt and is now looking to fly no earlier than tomorrow. And that will be a return to flight mission for the Alpha rocket, flying a slightly different iteration of the vehicle, testing out some new modifications as they transition fully to their Block 2 version of Alpha, beginning with Flight 8. And that will go ahead and do it for our live coverage of the Starlink 6-108 mission. As a reminder, coming up here in just about 2.5 hours, there will be a briefing from NASA Administrator Jaron Isaacman, along with Associate Administrator Amit Kshatriya and Acting Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems Mission Development Mission Directorate, Lori Glaze, discussing where things currently stand with the Artemis 2 mission following the rollback of the rocket from the pad to the VAB to address work on a helium flow issue that cropped up after a successful second wet dress rehearsal of that rocket. In its latest update published yesterday, NASA said that its engineers have narrowed their the possible culprits for the helium flow issue to either a seal on the tubing quick disconnect or a check valve on the other end of the tubing. The quick disconnect is extending from the mobile launcher out towards the rocket. If you think just visually about the SLS rocket, where the cone or where the core stage starts to taper in, that conical section is the launch vehicle stage adapter, which houses part of the interim cryogenic propulsion stage of the ICPS. And just above that, where if you're looking at the rocket directly, you'll see the American flag on one part of the ICPS. Just behind that is the aforementioned quick disconnect. That's unfortunately a part of the rocket that they just can't fully assess while the vehicle is at the pad, which is why it's now back inside the VAB getting checked out. So we'll be hearing more from Administrator Isaacman and the panel on that. Again, that's beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern. We will have that briefing for you in full live over on our 24/7 live stream called Artemis Live. The panel will also be discussing the next steps for the Artemis campaign more broadly as well. And with that, I want to thank our friends Pete Karstens with Maxkey Productions and Chuck and Jen Briggs for being on standby, even if the launch views were not great for tracking this morning. Thanks to our photography team here as well, to John and Adam for making sure we had at least good views heading into a foggy morning. Our thanks to moderator Aussie Space Girl and to channel member Cumulus Granatus for helping to answer folks' questions in the chat. John Pisani was doing the lion's share of the technical operations of the broadcast today with support from our editor, Stephen Young. Most importantly, I want to thank you at home for taking the time to be with us for this broadcast. And thanks in a supporting role to the wonderful wildlife here at the Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge, as visually represented by our great blue heron friend here as we're closing out the show. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.